I'm an Egyptian. I was born in Cairo, in northern Cairo, and it's where I grew up and spent my whole life until last year when I was forced to leave because running for my life, actually, because I publicly condemned Hamas. I grew up like most Egyptians are. I grew up on understanding that, Israel is our biggest enemy. We should hate all the Jews because all the Jews are enemies to all the Muslims. And we were told in our mosques that to be a good Muslim, you have to fight against the Jews and against Israel. We were told in our media to be a good patriot Egyptian, to be a good Egyptian, you have to hate Israel. Although I didn't find any reason to hate Israel or hate the Jews, actually. All the people I met who were Jewish were so nice, so kind, and I found also later on in my life that we have so many in common. And also Israel never really hurt Egypt. I was born after the peace accords were signed, the peace treaty was signed between Egypt and Israel. So I didn't find an excuse why I should hate Israel, actually. It's a country we have peace with. We don't have wars anymore. It's a good neighbor and a good friend. So this was me. I grew up, with this type of education, this type of understanding. But thank God, at one moment in my life, when I was 18 years old, something really amazing happened to me that helped me get out of this ideological box.
Uh-huh.
So, given this upbringing I told you about, it was natural for me when I was a fresh woman in university, in my first year in university, as undergraduate student in Egypt. It was natural for me to join the protests that were happening at that time against Israel. It was
You mean
around
the protest in Egypt?
in Egypt, yeah,
Mhm.
at university campuses, because it was around the time of the second Intifada.
Uh-huh.
So all campuses, all streets, everyone was protesting against Israel and saying bad things in the media and everything. So I joined these protests that were happening on my campus. Within or after 2 years of protesting, one day in a sunny, beautiful day in Cairo, like most of the sunny, beautiful days there, the organizers of the protest, to whom later I discovered that they are the Muslim Brotherhood, decided to burn some flags. So they started by the Israeli flag, which made sense because the protest is against Israel. Then they burned the American flag, which didn't make any sense to me because I kept asking myself, why burning the flag of a country that exists thousands of miles away will help the people in Gaza, will help the humanitarian situation in Gaza, or liberate Al-Aqsa Mosque, or all this stuff. And then the third flag they burned was the Egyptian flag, my own flag. And this was the moment when I felt something wrong is happening. These people cannot be good people and at the same time burn my flag for the sake of the Palestinians. And then at that moment, I stood and asked myself, like, okay, we sympathize with the Palestinians for humanitarian reasons, but they are not a priority over my country, over me, over my identity as an Egyptian. And then I started to question, what's going on? Why these groups that's called the Muslim Brotherhood don't mind burning the flag? And then I decided to educate myself about Islam, Islamism, the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, and also about Israel, Judaism, and the ideology of the Jews and how much similar it is to Islam. Actually, I was very, very surprised.
How old were you when you started
18,
learning?
18 years
18.
old, 18 years old, my first year in university. And then out of and educated myself about Israel, about the Middle East conflict, about all of these issues. And since then, I became a totally different person. I became an advocate for peace between Egypt and Israel, and between Israel and Arabs. I became an advocate for peace, for dialogue between Muslims and Jews. And I started to reach out even to Jewish people and have dialogue with and speak with. including, by the way, some Egyptian Jews, which was a surprise to me at that age, discovering for the first time that there were Egyptian Jews, and they never told us about them. They never told us in our media or our schools or anything about them. And since that time also, I became a fighter against, and I'm very proud of that, against the ideology of radical Islamists, particularly the Salafists and the jihadists and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Just a quick question regarding Egypt. How is the Muslim Brotherhood doing now these days? Is it still an issue in the country?
The Muslim Brotherhood, after the Arab Spring in 2011, they got their momentum. They reached to the top of power in Egypt. They became in presidency, in parliament. They controlled the country. And then the people were so shocked and very quickly removed them from power, and the military took over the work of the people, as you know. What happened is that after this period, the influence or political impact of the Muslim Brotherhood started to severely decline in Egypt. People were very much against the group and against anything related to the group or listening to them in any way, until recently, when October 7 happened. Somehow radical Islamists, not only the Muslim Brotherhood, but also the Salafists, which in my opinion is as dangerous and even more dangerous than the Muslim Brotherhood, actually a group that is really widely controlling the grassroots citizens in Egypt, the poor and the people in rural areas and so. So these two groups, the Salafists and the Muslim Brotherhood, started to gain momentum once again because of the October 7 attacks and the success of Hamas in doing these attacks. And also because the war that started in Gaza after that. And again, Al Jazeera is showering people with these footage of children under the rubble, women being killed, and all this stuff. So the sentiments started to be strong again in a way that allowed the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists in general to take over or to take the lead of the public opinion once again, which
do you think
is very dangerous?
It's very interesting because there was a blockade on the Egyptian side of the border between Gaza and Egypt, and there still is. Egyptians don't know. Do you think Egyptians don't know about it, or they just don't care?
They know. Actually, look, we have different groups of Egyptians we're speaking about. If we are talking about the Islamists, they don't care. They don't really care about the Palestinian people. They don't care about the children under the rubble or the women. The only way they care about them is that, okay, they can use them as numbers to legitimize their extremism and their actions of hate towards Israel and jihad against Israel. This is Islamists. For the Egyptians and also Jordanians, because these are the two immediate neighbors of Israel and the Palestinian territories, and these are the people who can open their borders to take Palestinian refugees. For them, it's different between the general public and the leadership. The political leadership. The general public saying, okay, we love the Palestinians. We will sing all types of love to the Palestinians day and night, but while they are on the other side of the border. If they cross the border, then they are a threat to our economy, they are a threat to our existence, and we will plug them. We don't want them. The leadership plays to the domestic audience, the political leadership in Egypt, the political leadership in Jordan. Okay, they are playing on the fears of the domestic audience and they amplify these issues that if the Palestinian refugees came in, well, Hamas will also infiltrate into Egypt and we will have a fight with Israel and things will escalate very quickly. And they represent the issue of receiving Palestinian refugees inside Egypt, which should be a moral duty of Egypt, actually an ethical duty of Egypt. Unfortunately, they are portraying it as if it is a threat to our national security. Very manipulative, and actually it's also heartbreaking because I myself, before I leave Egypt, I was trying to help some of the families flee from the war when the war started. some of the Palestinian families. And unfortunately, I did not find any cooperation from the Egyptian authorities, and they were put under the mercy of a militia group in Sinai that asked them for money to allow them in, and of course a huge amounts of money actually, and of course they couldn't do it. So I don't know what happened to them, because shortly after that I myself was forced to leave Egypt after I publicly condemned Hamas, and these radical Islamists who are now leading the public opinion in Egypt came after me, and they wanted to kill me. Some of them even went to my family house looking for me.
So
And
you were really in danger.
I was in real danger. Like, people wanted to kill me just because I condemned Hamas October 7 attack. And I said Hamas is a terrorist organization and Israel is simply defending itself. And you cannot blame Israel for defending itself against a terrorist organization. But you know, the shocking part for me was when I contacted the Egyptian authorities, the security authorities in Egypt, to tell them that my life is in danger and these radical Islamists want to kill me. Their response was, "We will not protect you because you said you support Israel." You know, it's crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah, and then after that, a number of lawyers filed legal claims against me. Some of them are very close to the regime, by the way. They filed legal claims against me at the Attorney General's office, accusing me of spying to the Israeli Mossad, committing high treason, and endangering Egypt's national security and inciting war crimes in Gaza. It's crazy. So I was at a moment, you know, either ending up being killed or being in jail. So I had to flee.
Mhm. It's funny in a sense because when you think about General Sisi, he hates Muslim Brotherhood. So.
El Sisi is a pragmatic person. He hated the Muslim Brotherhood not because he disagrees with their ideology, but because they formed a threat to his rule and to the
Mm.
rule of the military, or to the opportunity of the military to rule the country after the fall of Mubarak. This is why he hated them.
Mm.
And then he pretending that, you know, he and his the people around him later on pretending that they are friends with Israel, they want cooperation with Israel. It was also very pragmatic, because as soon as October 7 happened and we saw, Egypt unfortunately was one of the very first countries that turned against Israel, and they even went as far as blaming Israel for the October 7 attack, you know, like as if it's the fault of Israel, not the fault of Hamas.
You've been active in the Muslim-Jewish dialogue and Arab-Israeli dialogue for 16 years, if I'm right. You publicly expressed, so we can hear it now, but you publicly expressed your support for Israel's military actions against Hamas. Following October 7, you condemned Hamas, you voiced support for Israel's efforts to eliminate the terrorist army. Would you say, were you surprised by the level of atrocities? Let's put it this way.
Oh my God, what happened on October 7, you mean?
Yeah.
First of all, you know, it was not reported in our media that it was an attack on civilians. What we like, the very first reports we had on our Arab media and Egyptian media was simply that it just another clash between Hamas militants and Israeli soldiers. Nobody mentioned anything about the raping of the women, the killing of the people in their homes, in their pajamas, you know, on the breakfast table. Nobody mentioned this. Then a few days after, you know, the news started to come out and very confusing and people did not understand what was going on, I was invited to a video conference in Arabic that was held by the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Defense, sorry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense of Israel. And it was in Arabic, which was great, by the way, and very rare of Israel. As you know, they are not very good with public relations and PR, so it was impressive at that time. It was in Arabic, and there were more than more than 200 Arabic-speaking journalists, activists, and writers from all over the region who joined. So I joined this, and for the first time, I saw they showed us what happened on October 7. Videos from the videos that were released later actually are only small part of the truth. They showed us some videos of what happened on October 7 from the cameras of the houses there and the cameras of the terrorists even, who were very proud, filming themselves while committing these terrible, terrible crimes against the Israeli people. So it made me very angry at that time. I remember very well. I was angry not just because these atrocities were really horrible, horrific in every way, but also I was angry because I did not understand why my own people, the Arabs and Muslims, were celebrating such a thing. How comes they celebrated just because the person who was attacked is a Jew? How come we just become so, how we lost our humanity in such a way? So I took on myself the mission after watching this, after being in this video conference and watching these horrible videos. I took on myself the mission to stand up for the victims of October 7 and tell my own people, the Arabs and Muslims, what really happened on that day. So I immediately went on to my social media platforms and I started to write about it, to write about what happened on October 7, and that it's very different from what's being told to us in traditional media outlets. And then, I started to receive like attacks and death threats once I started publishing this, but then things escalated very quickly when I appeared on an interview, a podcast interview in Arabic with the Institute for National Security Studies, and I spoke about all of this. And
You mean in Israel? Still in Israel?
it is in Israel, but it was on Zoom. I
On
didn't go
Zoom.
to
Okay,
Israel.
okay.
I was in Cairo. I was doing the interview from Cairo at that time. And the interview went viral, and my statements, especially saying that Arab countries should support Israel, also went viral. And speaking about Hamas, speaking about the photos and videos that I saw from the horrific October 7 attack. Also, this was all in the interview, and people were I don't know, it went crazy. From my experience, I've been since I came here, I've been touring American universities and speaking with students on both sides, the pro-Palestinian and the pro-Hamas even ones, and also the pro-Israel ones. So I've been to about 25 campuses so far in the US. And it's interesting that we have, first of all, on the pro-Israel side, things are very clear. They know exactly what they are fighting for, what they are standing for. But on the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas group, it's very interesting. We have two categories. The people who are leading these groups are the pro-Hamas ones. They are members of organizations like the Students for Justice in Palestine and other different names of organizations that all, if you track where they all come from and what they are doing, you will see that they are going back, way back 15 years ago, to the BDS campaign, the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction campaign that was launched against Israel from inside American campuses 15 years ago. They all somehow are linked there. And these organizations actually are funded by, these student organizations are funded by nonprofits, and these nonprofits are funded by Qatar and Iran and other groups. And actually, these not are my words. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence here in the US issued a report in July 2024, earlier this year, saying that Iran is involved in organizing these protests. And some other reports found that Qatar is actually funding the non-profit organizations that are funding the student groups on campus who are doing this. So we have these groups who know very well what they are doing. They are very evil, and they are serving a foreign agenda of Qatar, Iran, and the axis of evil, or axis of resistance, as they call themselves in the Middle East. And of course, the goal of this axis of resistance is to destroy Israel, and not only Israel, but to destroy the West in general, the Western culture, the Western civilization. And this is something I think people in the West need to understand, because what's happening in the Middle East now is not the problem of the Middle East. It is the problem of Europe. It is the problem of the United States, because these terrorists are not targeting Israel because it is Israel. They are targeting Israel because they think it is the representative or the agent of the Western imperialist culture that they want to destroy, or the Western imperialist civilization, as they call it, that they want to destroy. So this is how they are thinking. So we have this group, but we have also some, I call them, and I don't mean it in an impolite way or anything, but just naive students. They were just like me when I was a fresh woman in university myself, brainwashed. They see all these images of people in Gaza and suffering, so they are sympathizing with them. They don't know much about the Middle East, They just need to be educated. And I spoke to many of them, and believe me, many of them just told me, okay, oh, this is something we hear for the first time. We didn't know that this is the fact. We didn't know that this is the truth. So they started to change. They are willing to change. They are willing to debate. So these I call the pro-Palestinian students, and I understand where they are coming from. They are just sympathizing with the situations. They want to feel like being part of something bigger than themselves, which is natural for their age.
Yeah.
I think actually for many years, people were warning against the rising waves of Islamists in the West, radical Islamists in particular. And when we say Islamist also, we don't mean Muslims. I mean, moderate Muslims are everywhere. They're doing great things worldwide, and they are making big achievements. In many countries, they immigrated too, but we are speaking specifically about the Islamists, the ones who took religion and politicized it to serve their own agendas. And these are very dangerous because they range from the jihadists, the very explicit, well-known jihadists, up to manipulative political Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood and so. And unfortunately, they do exist in the West with large numbers. And they have their own agenda to destroy the West from within.
So you're making a difference between Islam and Islamism. I understand it perfectly. You fought political and cultural battles against political Islamists and radical Islamist groups, and not just in Egypt, but across, as you said, across the Arab world and in the US, right? Now,
Yes.
I have a personal question. As a religious Muslim yourself, do you believe Islam as a religion, as a fundamental issue with Jews, Christians, or generally speaking, religious minorities? Or is it more about how certain interpretations have been weaponized over time?
Right. Actually, you're right. The problem with Islam as a religion, as the religion we know today, is that, okay, not Islam, how can I say? The problem with the Muslims practicing Islam today is that we were raised on the concept that we should not debate Islam. We should not debate the holy texts that we disagree with. We should just accept it for what it is, because these are words coming from God and the prophet of God, and we should follow that. And personally, I was struggling with this my whole life because I had questions. I had things to ask about. I saw things that did not make any sense to me in the holy texts. Did not make any sense to me, for example, to hate people just because they have a different religion. It did not make any sense to me why men have to marry like 4 women just to follow the prophet who married 13 women, and why the prophet even married 13 women, So I had all these questions myself growing up, until actually later on in my life, when I broke out of this ideological box I told you about earlier, I started to take a different path in the way how I approach Islam. I told you earlier, not all Muslims are the same. There is actually a very wide spectrum of Muslims, ranging from radical ones up to reformist and liberal ones. I consider myself one of the liberals and reformists. Yes, I adopt religion, Islam, as my religion. It's how I practice my relationship with God. How, this is part of my belief. and my perception of the world, but it's something between me and God. It has nothing to do with the world we're living in. The world we're living in is something that's based on other rules, other, values, and I have to adapt to these rules and these values and adopt them as my own way of dealing with other human beings. And by the way, I'm not the only person who's doing that. There is a huge reformist liberal movement in the Muslim societies. One of them is very prominent in Egypt, for example. Actually, it started in Egypt and Syria, ironically. Of course, nobody knows where Syria is going now. What we are witnessing right now is very interesting in the Middle East. I wrote an article about this actually, so let me summarize it for you. We are witnessing the moment of the birth of what we can call the pragmatic political jihadism. It's very similar to the pragmatic political Islamism that we saw in the 1980s after the success of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. The success of the Islamic Revolution in Iran in toppling a dictator and, taking their place and also fighting under the slogans of democracy and freedom and all of that, and then taking over power as Islamists inspired other Islamist groups in the region at that time in the 1980s to become also political and seek a political role in their countries. We saw at that time the birth of Hamas, the political impact of the Muslim Brotherhood started even to be bigger. So this was one thing. What we are watching now is political jihadism being born, meaning that the jihadist groups who were usually, fighting on a very hardline ideological background are not like this anymore. They are willing to adapt in order to get political gains. They are not only fighting for their ideology right now, but they are fighting for power. So they don't mind playing manipulative political games to get to power, which means also we might see it might infect other countries all over the region or other jihadist groups in the region to do similar things in other Arab countries, to use force in order to topple the dictators and then play this political game and take over power.
And I think exactly. I think the king of Jordan must have difficulty to sleep these days.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
yes. Oh yeah. Well, some argue that in Egypt too, they have very big
Yeah.
fears about what happened in Syria that may inspire an action in Egypt as well.
I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes. We are talking about Islam and Islamism. You have like many terrorist attacks have been carried out in the name of Islam over the last decades. How does that weigh on you personally? Do you feel it's a constant
Oh,
burden or something you can't escape thinking about?
yeah, of course, it's a burden, of course, because as I told you, some people, especially in the West, it's difficult for them to differentiate between different types of Muslims. Or at least I hope because of the developments that are happening now, this is going to change. But until now, the vast majority cannot differentiate between the different types of Muslims. And the problem, as I told you as well, is that the problem is in Islam itself. All these jihadist groups are not acting on their own. They go back to the holy texts, to the very emotionally charged holy texts that speak about, fighting against other tribes because they have another religion, of spreading Islam with the power of sword and the importance of spreading Islam over other populations. And so they dig deep into these holy texts, very old ones that were written in a time that is very different from our time now. And they take them as an excuse, as a law upon which they by which they justify their jihadist work. So this is, I don't know, I cannot, consider Islam as a religion completely innocent from this. It's because unfortunately this is not true. But at the same time, jihadists are very good in finding the justification for what they're doing. I'm not sure if I'm clear, but it's
Well, I think probably the problem is I'm just thinking out loud. When you think of a friend of mine just told me recently is Muslim. he told me that Muslims should separate themselves from some episodes of the past because those episodes need to be contextualized and we shouldn't, live by those episodes. Typically, the episodes of Khaybar in Saudi Arabia, when Muhammad apparently,
Yes.
with his men, massacred Jews, like men, women, and children. But I mean,
It was a genocide at that time, by the way.
yes,
It was
but
a genocide. They removed an entire tribe from existence.
yeah, Jews in Saudi Arabia, or what was
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia. And the problem is in the demonstrations that we experienced in the US, in the Western world in general, we saw lots and lots of people chanting, Khaybar, Khaybar al-Yahud. And I think,
In reference to that.
yeah,
In reference
yeah,
to, yeah,
yeah.
of course. Yeah.
And well, which brings me to my to my very relaxing topic now. Until recently, it was the topic of the day, the so-called Palestinian cause. How do you phrase it? I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
By the way,
Yeah.
it would be, I'm just thinking, it would be fascinating to explore how the terms Palestine and Palestinians were historically associated with Jews and later adopted by
Actually, yeah.
us. But
And then,
that's for
yeah.
another time, probably. Well, look, what's your view on this cause? What's your view on the Palestinian cause, as we say?
It's really interesting you ask this question because when people hear the word Palestinian cause, they may assume that it means maybe giving a homeland to the Palestinian people, or the people whom we call today the Palestinians, who are the Arabs in this area. And giving them a homeland, building a Palestinian state where they can live happily next to Israel and nobody is hurting nobody, But this is not the Palestinian cause at all. The Palestinian cause is to eliminate Israel. This is exactly their goal, is to eliminate Israel from existence. The Palestinians are not obsessed. The Palestinians and the Arabs from behind them are not obsessed with building their own state as much they are obsessed with destroying the Israeli state. And this is the most dangerous part, in my opinion. And this is what needs to be exposed about the so-called Palestinian cause. It attracted so many people around it worldwide, while they don't really understand what they are supporting. They are supporting an action of terrorism, a call for terrorism, actually, this so-called Palestinian cause. There is no such a thing. If the Palestinians really want to live in peace, they want to live in coexistence, live as, good neighbors to the Israelis, other things need to happen other than what we are watching today. Because also this Palestinian cause was manipulated in a very interesting way. First, it started during the Pan-Arabism era in the 1950s and 60s as a cause to liberate this piece of land from the river to the sea from the hands of the Western imperialist agent called Israel. And then in the 1980s and 90s, with the birth, with the rise of all these Islamist organizations and groups, and so the Palestinian cause became to liberate the Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Islamic holy sites from the hands of the bad Jews who are not protecting them. Did you see how they play with words? It's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, they were helped by the Soviets, as I often say. So they had the masters, I think Nasser and the Soviets. But interestingly, I had a friend who was part of the negotiating team during Oslo, you remember, in the 90s. And he was discussing with one of the Palestinian counterparts, a very moderate guy, I can't remember the name. And at the end of the meeting, he said,
He's Palestinian?
Yeah, Palestinian, like a moderate one who was like negotiating, the accord and the territories and whatever. And my friend said to him, so now you're happy? You're happy? We're reaching the end of history, so to speak. And the guy said, no, I'm not happy. We want the entire territory. But for now, it's good.
Okay,
Interesting.
Wow, exactly. You know what's funny here? Also, how words are being manipulated. Words like ceasefire and peace, when you say them as a Westerner, they are completely different from how someone from Hamas or from the Arab world says them. They have a completely different meaning. The word ceasefire, for example, you mean when you think, ceasefire means to end the war and to have peace, a lasting peace, and to have, prosperity ever after. But this is not the case for the jihadists. For jihadists, ceasefire means jihadists and also like the Palestinian Authority and all these people, ceasefire means temporary pause of the war. It's a truce. It's hudna, we call it hudna. It's only a temporary pause for the war so we can, have some rest, rearm and regroup and then come back and kill you or continue killing you. This is how they are thinking.
So what's the solution? Do you think of any possible solution for this endless conflict?
Oh, first to get rid of the Islamists. The first solution is to get rid of the Islamists and their influence on politics in not only in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but in our entire region. Get rid of Islamists and everything else will be solvable. Really. Get rid of the impact of Islamists, the ideology of radical Islamists, and everything else in the region will be solvable because it will be based on pragmatic political transactions.
I don't know how to. You manage to navigate very complex and heavy topics with such clarity. I must say, the stance that you've taken is incredibly courageous. Considering your religious background, supporting Israel and advocating for liberal reform is anything but easy or relaxing. What are your next plans?
So right now I'll continue, doing the campus visits that I'm doing and trying to educate as much people as possible about the Middle East that I know, the real Middle East, not the Middle East they know from wrong resources or inaccurate resources. So this is my mission, at least for the coming few months.
Let's promise to reconvene when there's finally peace in the Middle East. It may take a while, but let's stay optimistic. Right?
Oh, yes, maybe all of us, all of your guests, including Yasmin, myself, and everyone come together.
Exactly.
One big party and celebrate peace happening, hopefully.
Exactly. Amen. Exactly.
Amen.
So, thank you very much, Dalia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raphael. It was a great pleasure being with you here today. Thank you.
Bye-bye.